It is said that in the long ago age, when kingdoms carved their prayers into stone and their names into the drifting sands, there was raised a gate unlike any other. It did not guard a city, nor open into a palace. It was not bound to walls, nor tethered to any road. It stood alone, at the edge of a desert where silence was law, where the wind moved like a spirit, and time itself bowed into stillness. The gate was tall, solemn, and crowned with arches that bore celestial marks. Every curve of its stone seemed to breathe with meaning, etched with lines that resembled the constellations above. When the desert night unfolded, stars would fall into perfect alignment with the carvings, so that the gate appeared less a structure of earth and more a mirror of the heavens themselves. Some who wandered the desert stumbled upon it and spoke of a trembling in their chest, as if their heartbeat was not entirely their own, but was echoing from somewhere beyond the arch. Others swore that passing beneath it was like stepping into the breath of another world, a world that remembered you before you were born. The invitation of the stars' whispers tell us that this solitary gate was once the threshold of a kingdom whose rulers believed the stars were not distant fires, but ancestors watching from eternity. Each constellation was a lineage, each cluster of light, a voice, and each wandering star a messenger moving between the realms. The people of that forgotten land are said to have built their lives not upon the soil, but upon the rhythm of the night sky. And so, the gate was aligned to the silent constellation, a pattern of stars no longer named on modern maps, a pattern erased from the charts we study today. But in the desert, beneath the hush of endless night, the constellation still lingers. It hovers there, a silent witness, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be remembered. The deepening mystery. It is said that each stone of the gate was laid in a ritual of silence. The builders worked not with command or hammer's shout, but with gestures and breath alone. For they believed that noise could fracture the alignment, disturb the listening sky, and scatter the attention of their ancestors. Imagine, then, the raising of this portal, men and women moving like shadows, placing blocks under moonlight, lips pressed shut, hearts attuned to the heavens. The only sound was the shifting sand, the sigh of the wind, the crackle of torches burning low. Every arch was etched with signs, spirals, waves, and star shapes. They pressed their vows into the stone, vows of devotion, vows of remembrance. Some signs told of rituals that unfolded only when the moon was at its thinnest crescent. Others marked the arrival of certain stars, those that appeared just before dawn when the world felt most fragile. And there were marks no one now can decipher, lines that speak a language time has buried, symbols whose meaning has dissolved like salt in water. Between two worlds, it is not hard to picture how the kingdom must have appeared. By day, it was dust and flame, the sun laying its hand heavily upon every roof and stone. But by night, oh by night, it became something else. Imagine the desert floor glowing with starlight, the sands glittering as though each grain was a shard of broken sky. The people gathered in veiled circles, chanting in voices that blended with the wind, until it was impossible to tell whether the sound came from earth or from the stars themselves. Beneath the silence, beneath the soft weight of eternity, they lived between two worlds, one bound to the earth, heavy and mortal, the other celestial, endless, and untouched. Perhaps this is why the gate was built, not to open into a city, but to open into this very in-between. To stand at its threshold was to stand at the seam between earth and sky, the visible and the unseen. The ritual of moonlight. It is whispered that during the rare nights when the constellation above aligned perfectly with the carvings upon the gate, a ritual unfolded that none outside their people ever witnessed. Some say the gate itself became translucent, shimmering like a veil of water. Others believe a hum filled the air, low and unending, vibrating through the bones of every creature who stood nearby. The people came with offerings, bowls of dust gathered from their ancestors' tombs, stones marked with their family lines, and water drawn from hidden springs said to lie beneath the desert. They placed these at the base of the gate, where the shadows of the stars fell, and there, in silence, they waited. For what? For a voice, for a stirring in the heavens, for the ancestors to look back through the gate and acknowledge them, not as mortals lost in time, but as children of the stars, the forgotten voices. But time, as it always does, folded over them. The kingdom, like all kingdoms, dissolved. The rituals became whispers, the whispers became dust, and yet the gate remains. Travelers who have stood before it speak of faint impressions carved not by tools, but by hands pressed into stone. Palm shapes, layered over centuries, as if countless generations sought to leave a trace of themselves where heaven touched earth. These handprints are shallow now, worn smooth by sandstorms, yet still visible the memory of memory. Some say, if you place your hand against the stone, you can feel a pulse. Not the beating of your own heart, but something slower, deeper, older, as if the gate itself remembers you, even if you have forgotten it. The silence that remains, and so the gate endures, a threshold without a city, a door without a house. It stands in the middle of the desert, watched only by stars, buried in the stillness of time. What did it guard? What did it reveal? Perhaps it was never meant to be crossed, but only to remind those who beheld it that life is lived in the space between earth and sky, between past and future, between silence and all sound. Even now, under the sweep of the silent constellation, the gate waits. It waits for eyes that will see, for hands that will listen, for hearts that will remember. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some doors are not meant to lead us forward or back, but upward into the endless unspoken eternity. Beneath the silence, it waits. Beneath the stars, it endures. A gate that belongs to both worlds, and to neither. A threshold suspended in wonder. Perhaps, when sleep draws close and the night sky lowers itself upon your dreams, you too will find yourself there standing before the gate beneath the silent constellation, unsure whether it opens inward, toward ruins, or upward, into eternity. The library of dust and shadow. It is said there are places in the world where silence holds the weight of centuries, where stones are not merely stones, but ribs of something long buried, hollow remnants of a creature called memory. Among such places lies a ruin spoken of in whispers, a ruin where walls rise like the skeletal frame of an ancient beast, fractured, half consumed by time. Beneath the dimming light of dusk, one can imagine standing there, a chamber without roof, its pillars leaning, its stones softened by the ceaseless passage of sand and wind. The air is thick with dust, drifting like a breath too old to belong to anyone living. Shadow pools in the corners, quiet and patient, as though the ruin itself were watching. And in this stillness, it is remembered once, within these walls, there was a library, the invitation. But this was no library of parchment or leather-bound volumes. Its shelves held not books, but tablets, slabs of clay pressed with marks so intricate, so interwoven, that they seemed less like writing and more like music hardened into stone. Every line curved with intention, every symbol spiraled outward, as though mimicking the patterns of stars or the veins of leaves. It is said that when torches burned against those walls, the carved signs reflected light as though alive, sending shifting patterns across the chamber like constellations unfolding. Here, scholars once gathered, not scholars in the manner we imagine now, but figures cloaked in robes heavy with dust, their faces pale beneath moonlight, their eyes seeking not knowledge for conquest, but understanding for communion. They believed thought itself was sacred, that every word, every number, every fragment of meaning was a bridge between the human and the eternal. They traced sacred equations upon clay. They pressed symbols that aligned with the stars, as though human hands could mirror the architecture of the heavens. The library, it is whispered, was less a house of study than a house of listening. The deepening mystery whispers tell us that in those days, knowledge was not given freely. It was considered a form of power too delicate to scatter without reverence. Some words were never spoken above a whisper. Some texts were shown only to those who had endured long years of silence and solitude, as if only emptiness could make space for the fullness of what was hidden there. Legends speak of tablets whose markings carried not instructions, but incantations. When read aloud, the air itself seemed to shift, as though the stones understood. There were accounts of voices carried on the wind, answering questions that had never been asked aloud. It is said that even kings sought entry, but found the library closed to them, for power of the crown was seen as shallow compared to the patience of silence. Some scholars, the myths say, devoted entire lives to a single tablet, not because the tablet was vast, but because every line revealed another depth, every curve another hidden layer, They believed each symbol was more than a letter, it was a doorway, and to pass through such a doorway required not quickness, but surrender. The Chamber of Twilight. Imagine now, the library at dusk, when the last light of the sun bends across the horizon and the first stars emerge like patient witnesses. The pillars stand half broken, shadows stretching across the floor like dark rivers. Dust drifts endlessly, each grain catching what little light remains, as though time itself were dissolving into particles. Scholars move softly, their robes brushing the ground, their movements quiet as if to keep from disturbing the silence. They lean over tablets, tracing marks with fingers that tremble not from weakness, but from reverence. Every breath feels measured, as though too much noise might fracture the delicate balance of meaning. Some believe they were not writing at all, but listening, that the tablets themselves carried voices, messages pressed into clay by something greater than human hands. When they leaned close, they did not read but remembered fragments of wisdom their souls had once known but forgotten. Forbidden knowledge. It is whispered that not all of what lay within the library was gentle. Among the tablets were warnings, secrets, shadows clothed in language. Some carried equations that could chart not only the stars, but the fall of empires. Others spoke of pathways into the soul, corridors too deep to walk without losing oneself, and there were texts that no one dared read in full. Their symbols bent inward, spiraled into forms that pulled the mind toward places neither light nor dark, but something stranger, something beyond naming. To look too long at them, some said, was to hear a sound not with ears, but within one's bones, a low hum like the earth dreaming. Kings, when they heard of such things, longed to possess them, but the library was not theirs to command. When their envoys arrived, they found only silence, only gates that would not open. It was said the library itself could vanish, folding into shadow when approached by those unworthy. The library as metaphor, and yet, though centuries have turned and the roof has fallen, the library remains not whole, but as memory. Its walls rise like hollow ribs, its stones bear the marks of forgotten inscriptions, now crumbled, now unreadable. Dust has claimed what was once sacred, and shadow dwells where voices once gathered. But perhaps this is the fate of all knowledge, not to be preserved as permanence, but to dissolve, to shift, to live on only as metaphor. For what is a library, if not a vessel of memory? And what is memory, if not dust held briefly in the hands, always slipping away, always falling back into silence? The fade into silence, stand there now, in your imagining. Stand in the ruined chamber, where the last light fades, and the stars lean close. Feel the dust on your skin, soft as ancient breath. See the shadows deepening, pooling like ink spilled across the floor. Close your eyes and listen. Do you hear it? The faintest echo, not of words spoken, but of words that once lived here, pressed into clay, breathed into silence. Voices that knew knowledge was not meant to conquer, but to connect. Voices that understood wisdom as something fragile, something that slips through hands if grasped too tightly. Perhaps the true library was never in the tablets at all. Perhaps it lingers only in the silence that now fills its crumbled halls. A silence that asks nothing, yet offers everything. A silence that belongs not to time, but to eternity. And so, when the night closes in and sleep begins its slow approach, remember this place, the library of dust and shadow. A library too fragile for time, yet too sacred to vanish entirely. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps its knowledge endures only in the hush that drifts between stars, only in the dust that shimmers in moonlight, only in the silence that breathes through us when words fall away. And perhaps it waits still, the oracles veil beneath the silent cliffs. It is said that beyond the river that no longer runs, beneath cliffs draped in silence, there once stood an oracle's chamber. The river has long since dried to dust, its bed carved into the earth like an empty scar, but in ages past its waters flowed endlessly, curling like silver serpents through the valley. They say it was along its banks that pilgrims walked, barefoot and bowed, carrying offerings of firelight and prayer. The river guided them, winding slowly toward a place where silence gathered like a second skin. There, pressed against the base of the cliffs, stood a chamber. Not vast, not adorned with grandeur, but simple, as if designed to hold only what was necessary. and at its entrance hung a veil, a single cloth of woven silver threads, so fine it trembled with the breath of the night wind. It was not heavy, not permanent, but light, so light that one wondered whether it belonged more to the earth or to the air. When the wind moved, the veil shimmered, shifting between what was hidden and what was revealed. It was said that this veil was the oracle's doorway, and that beyond it the voices of eternity spoke. The invitation: imagine standing there at twilight. The cliffs rise above you like sleeping giants, their surfaces streaked with shadows. The air is dry, heavy, carrying the faint echo of what was once a river's song. And before you, the veil, pale, trembling, whispering softly as it catches the starlight. Those who came did not pass beyond it, they did not lift it, nor step into the chamber with their own will. Instead, they waited, for the oracle's chamber was not a place to speak, but a place to listen. The wind moved through the cliffs, carrying voices no human tongue could shape, and those who knelt at the threshold were told that these were not the voices of earth, but of something greater. The deepening mystery whispers tell us that the chamber was built not for the oracle herself, but for the veil, that the stone arch was raised with such precision that the winds, when passing through, sang with clarity. The veil, woven of threads marked by the moon, caught these currents, transforming them into whispers of prophecy. Pilgrims traveled great distances to hear them. Some walked through desert heat, others through mountain cold. They brought offerings of water in clay bowls, flowers gathered from hidden groves, and small fires kindled in the hollow of their hands. But when they arrived, they did not present these gifts to the oracle. They laid them before the veil, and then they knelt, closing their eyes, waiting for the wind. It is said that no two heard the same words. For some, the veil sang of journeys yet to come, of rivers that would flow again in distant lands. For others, it whispered of endings, the slow crumbling of walls, the fading of names, the quiet return of dust to dust. And for a few, it gave no sound at all, only silence. But even in silence, they believed meaning lived. Rituals of twilight. The most sacred rites were performed when fire met water. At dusk, as the sun lowered itself into the horizon and the stars began to rise, pilgrims lit small flames in shallow bowls. They set these bowls upon the surface of the river, letting the water carry them toward the cliffs. The flames floated there, trembling, their reflections weaving with the first stars above. When the bowls reached the chamber, the oracle herself, a figure cloaked in robes as pale as ash, would take them and pour the water onto the stones, releasing steam that rose in ghostly trails. In that mingling of flame and water, fire and shadow, earth and air, the veil would begin to stir. The wind would find its voice, threading itself through the woven silver, and those waiting in silence would hear what they had come to hear. It is said the oracle never spoke her own words. Her mouth remained closed, her eyes lowered. For she was not the giver of prophecy, only the guardian of the veil, the one who kept it untouched by unworthy hands. The true oracle, the people believed, was the breath of the Panacha, world itself. The veil's song stories linger of what those voices sounded like. Some swore they were like the rustle of leaves in a forgotten forest. Others said it was a hum, low and oceanic, like waves pulling against the shore. And a few described hearing not sound at all, but memory fragments of their childhoods, faces long gone, moments never fully lived yet somehow known. The veil, it seems, was less a speaker of words than a mirror of the soul. It gave back to each listener not what they asked, but what they carried within. And so its prophecies were never fixed, never absolute. They were veiled, like dreams, open to interpretation, impossible to grasp fully, slipping away even as one tried to hold them. The fade of the river. But time, as always, moved on. The river grew thin, then shallow, then silent. The pilgrims dwindled. The veil, once shimmering with moonlight, grew tattered, its silver threads unraveling into the air. The chamber beneath the cliffs became another ruin, its stones broken, its silence left to echo with no one listening. And yet, it is said the veil was never destroyed. Some believe it was taken by the wind itself, lifted into the night and carried away, woven into the stars. Others believe it still hangs there, invisible now, a veil of silence rather than silver. Only those who come with open hearts, it is whispered, can still feel its presence pressing softly against the air, the fade into silence. Perhaps then, the chamber was never meant to endure as stone endures. Perhaps it was meant to live only as memory, as breath, as silence carried forward in the bones of those who once listened. Stand there now, in your imagination. Stand before the cliffs at night, when the stars burn faintly above, when the dry bed of the river glimmers pale beneath the moon. Close your eyes and listen. Feel the faintest touch of air against your cheek, the hush of wind threading its way through the emptiness. Is it only the night breeze? Or is it something more? Perhaps it is the oracle's veil, still trembling softly, whispering to those who wait without words. For some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some truths are too fragile for speech, too sacred for parchment, too eternal for time. The oracle's chamber stands no longer, but its silence remains. It drifts beneath the cliffs, it folds itself into the night air, it lingers in the quiet spaces between your thoughts. Perhaps the veil will never be seen again, but in the soft press of silence, in the hush that descends as sleep approaches, it waits, not to be spoken, not to be touched, only to be heard in stillness, in wonder, in the dreaming breath of eternity, the circle of moonstones. It begins in silence, among the forgotten fields, where grass sways in slow, unbroken waves, and the night breathes gently across the earth. There lies a circle of ancient stones. They stand not in defiance, but in stillness worn smooth, as though centuries of wind had passed their hands across them in reverence. Dew gathers along their curves, silvered in the last sigh of twilight, until each stone gleams faintly, like a lantern that does not burn, but remembers. It is said that they were not placed by chance, nor by the clumsy hand of necessity. They were arranged in rhythm with the moon itself, as though the night sky reached down and pressed its pattern into the soil. A sacred clock not to measure hours or fleeting days, but the slow movement of ages, the eternal spiraling of beginnings and endings. Stand before them, and you feel time loosen its grip. The stones are not merely there, they are waiting, and in their waiting, the air grows heavy with memory. Whispers of rituals. Whispers tell us that once, long ago, the circle was alive with fire and shadow. Torches rose in trembling hands, their flames bending in the wind, casting wavering light upon the spirals carved into stone. Men and women moved slowly, pacing in unison, their footsteps measured, as though each one struck a chord too deep to be heard. The circle was not a place of spectacle, but of vow. Beneath eclipses, when the moon's light was swallowed whole, and the world seemed to hold its breath, oaths were sworn. Some believe they were vows of kinship, binding not only one life to another, but one generation to the next. Others say they were promises to the earth itself, a pledge to honor soil and seed, river and stone, as sacred kin. There are stories soft, fragmented of wanderers who journeyed far to stand within this circle. They believed the stones held memory, that if one pressed a palm to their cool surface, some echo of the past would seep through the skin, leaving behind a dream that was not their own. Perhaps these were visions of those who had stood there before. Perhaps they were nothing but the quiet murmurs of wind and water. But those who returned from the circle often carried eyes that seemed distant, as if they had glimpsed something that words could never quite hold. The stones as witness. The stones themselves tell us nothing. They offer no inscription, no scroll unfurled with truth. Their silence is heavier than speech, and yet it feels alive, as though silence is precisely what they were meant to preserve. Look closely, and you will see spirals cut into their surfaces. Some are shallow, worn nearly smooth by centuries of rain. Others remain sharp, like secrets that refuse to fade. Spirals upon spirals, circles folding into circles, the symbol of what has no ending. It is said that the spiral was the first sign of eternity. Not a straight path, not a line that breaks, but a curve that always finds its way back to itself. To carve a spiral was to call upon the infinite, to remind the living that life was not a single passage, but a turning, and a returning, and a turning again. In this way, the stones became guardians of something larger than the lives of those who raised them, guardians of the memory that time, no matter how vast, could not erase. Beneath the moon's gaze, there are nights when the circle comes alive again, not with torches, nor with voices, but with light. The moon, in its slow patience, climbs above the horizon, and its gaze falls across the stones. One by one, they are touched by silver, until the entire circle glimmers faintly, like a necklace of pale fire laid upon the breast of the earth. Some say this alignment is no accident, that the stones were placed with precision, each one catching the moon's path, mapping its slow dance across the heavens. It is a calendar that does not speak of weeks or months, but of cosmic rhythms, the turning of seasons, the shadows of eclipses, the return of celestial cycles so vast that few among us would live to see them twice. Others believe the moon itself was once called into the circle as a guest of honor. Rituals, they say, were not meant for men alone, but for the cosmos. To bow before the moon's gaze was to step outside the brief flicker of one life and remember that we, too, are bound by the great circle. That every birth, every ending, every silence is but a fragment of a pattern far older than we can comprehend. Echoes in the grass. Even now, when the rituals are gone and the vows are forgotten, the land remembers. The grass around the stones seems softer, as though reluctant to grow wild. Birds sometimes fall quiet as they pass above, wings folding into hush. And there are those who claim, though no proof can be offered, that when one lingers too long in the circle, a strange stillness seeps in. The air grows dense, the skin tingles, and faintly, one hears the echo of footsteps. Not one's own, but those of another age. Footsteps that paced in rhythm, measured and unbroken. Shadows that once stretched across the spirals now whisper across the edges of sight. Perhaps these are tricks of the mind. Perhaps they are simply the earth, remembering itself. Yet to those who have felt it, the sensation lingers. A haunting, yes, but also a blessing, a reminder that we walk upon ground that has carried more than we can ever know. The waiting. The circle stands as it has always stood, patient, eternal, unmoved. Farmers pass in the distance, their plows cutting through soil once considered sacred. Children stumble upon it in play, throwing stones and laughing, their voices scattering like birds. But the circle does not answer. It waits. What does it wait for? Some say it waits for the return of those who once called upon it, a forgotten people whose bloodlines still walk among us, unaware. Others whisper it waits for a question, a moment when someone, standing alone beneath an eclipse, will ask not with words but with silence, and hear what has always been hidden. Or perhaps it waits for nothing at all. Perhaps waiting is its nature, a presence that endures without need, without expectation, like the mountains, or the sea, or the sky itself. The eternal return night deepens, the air cools, and above, the moon rises once more. It spills its light across the stones, across the spirals, across the grass that sways in slow and endless rhythm. If you close your eyes, you might almost hear it, the low hum of chants carried across centuries, the hiss of fire as torches bent against the wind, the heartbeat of footsteps marking time upon sacred earth. And then, as sleep draws near, the sound fades, leaving only silence, the kind of silence that does not end, but folds you into it. The stones gleam faintly in the moonlight, as they always have, as they always will, waiting, watching, remembering, and perhaps, as some believe, they are not merely stones at all. Perhaps they are the earth's own memory, set upright to remind us that even when names are lost, even when voices fall into dust, the circle endures, for the moon will rise again, and again, and again, and the stones will remain, silent, patient, eternal, the cavern where silence dwells. It begins not with sound, but with its absence. Deep within the mountains, far from the echo of valley bells or the murmur of rivers, there lies a cavern where sound does not travel. Step across its threshold, and the world itself seems to draw a breath and then forget to release it. Torches gutter in the stillness, their flames dancing but their crackle lost. Footsteps touch the stone floor, yet no rhythm follows. Even the air feels thick, heavy, as though it is holding secrets too fragile to be disturbed. It is said the ancients discovered this hollow not by seeking, but by stumbling upon it, drawn by some whisper of intuition that led them through winding passages until the mountain itself opened like a mouth, swallowing them into its hidden chamber. When they spoke, their voices died in the air, devoured by walls that refused to return them. To them, this was no ordinary emptiness. This was divinity. The sacred veil whispers tell us they called this place the veil, a space between mortal breath and sacred truth, a boundary where sound, that fragile tether between hearts, could not cross. Here, they believed, the world was closest to the silence of the gods. Altars were carved into the stone, low and smooth, their surfaces worn not by hands but by offerings laid carefully upon them. Not gold, nor crowns, nor weapons, but objects of the earth itself. A feather plucked from a mountain bird, a stone smoothed by river water, a fragment of silver, caught in moonlight and placed with trembling reverence. It was not wealth they brought, but symbols, symbols of air, of earth, of light, symbols that whispered to the silence we remember, and the silence, though voiceless, seemed to answer, not with sound, but with weight, a presence that pressed upon the skin, upon the bones, reminding those who knelt that they stood at the edge of something vast, something unknowable. Rituals in darkness. Some believe entire gatherings once moved into the cavern's depths, torches carried like falling stars through the stone corridors. Their flames, though alive, seemed muted, their light swallowed into the walls as though the darkness were drinking from them. The people would descend slowly, in silence, each step deliberate, until they reached the chamber where no voice could return. There, in the hush, they laid their offerings on the earth. No songs, no chants, no prayers spoken aloud, for here, to speak was to lose the word forever, swallowed whole by the waiting dark. Instead, their rituals were gestures, hands outstretched, palms pressed to the stone floor, heads bowed in reverence. Their worship was not sound, but stillness, not proclamation, but surrender. It is said that in the deepest part of the cavern, the silence grew so complete it seemed to seep into the body, into the very rhythm of the heart. Some returned from these rituals with eyes wide, voices hushed for weeks, as if they had been marked by something beyond human measure. Others, we are told, did not return at all. The prayers that do not return, myths, recall that voices carried into the cavern never found their way back. They were prayers without echoes, swallowed by the mountain itself. Some called this a warning that not all prayers are meant to be answered, and not all questions are meant to be asked. To speak in the cavern was to give something away, a fragment of soul, a breath that would never be yours again. Others, however, believed differently. They whispered that the cavern was no thief, but a guardian, that it carried those prayers into depths too vast for mortal hearing, offering them not to the earth, but to something beyond it. In this telling, the silence was not absence at all, but a presence too immense to return a reply. For what mortal voice could bear the answer of eternity? The silence as keeper. As centuries folded into centuries, the cavern remained. Empires rose and fell. In the valleys below, banners changed, tongues shifted, and yet the silence endured, untouched. Travelers spoke of it in hushed tones, as though even to mention it too loudly was a kind of trespass. They told of entering the cavern, and feeling as if eyes unseen were watching, not hostile, not welcoming, simply present, as though the silence itself were aware, patient, and infinite. Some described the cavern as breathing, a vast inhalation never released, a presence that filled the lungs and slowed the heart, until even thought itself seemed too loud to carry. The silence was not empty. It was a keeper, a guardian of something veiled, something that lay just beyond the reach of mortal sound. Where memory fades, beneath the silence, stories began to fray. Who carved the altars, who first stepped into the hush and called it sacred? Their names are gone, dissolved into dust, their language unremembered. Only the cavern itself remains, a monument not to words spoken, but to words withheld. Perhaps this is the true memory it keeps, that silence is older than any tongue, and deeper than any song. That long before voices rose to fill the air, there was only this, the stillness of stone, the hush of shadow, the listening earth. And so, when one enters the cavern, even now, it feels less like discovery and more like return, as if the silence has been waiting, patiently, for centuries, for footsteps to cross its threshold once more. The fade into hush. Now imagine yourself there, torches guttering, their flames bent low, the walls damp with centuries of unbroken breath. Your steps fall soft, and yet no sound follows. You pause, The air presses gently, heavily, as though reminding you to surrender the weight you carry. You kneel, and your hand brushes the cold stone, smooth, carved long ago. You place nothing upon it, and yet in that moment, you feel as though you have offered something all the same, the simple act of presence, the gift of being here, in this vast and sacred hush. And in that stillness, you wonder, is it absence you feel, or is it presence? A presence too immense, too luminous, too infinite for mortal sound to reach. No answer comes, none is needed. For the cavern remains, silent, patient, eternal, and as you drift into sleep, it seems to breathe with you, carrying you into its hush. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it waits not for words, but for silence itself. The city of twilight's breath, on cliffs that rise like waves of stone, there remains a city not raised by hands upon earth's flat soil, but etched directly into the rock itself. Imagine approaching at dusk. The cliffs stretch before you, immense and solemn, their faces carved with doorways that open into shadows, chambers suspended high above the ground. The windows, some square, some circular like unblinking eyes, catch the last gold of twilight and hold it, as though unwilling to let the day pass away. It is said this city was not built to live in, it was built to dream in. The invitation of twilight. The first glimpse feels less like arrival and more like intrusion upon a memory still breathing. The air is tinged with the scent of stone warmed by sun, now cooling, exhaling into night. The wind glides along the cliffside, brushing through narrow stairways that ascend like veins of lightless ascent, twisting, turning, and sometimes dissolving into nothing. At your feet, the path is worn smooth, though no footsteps echo. Before you, the cliff face glows faintly, each doorway a mouth that once opened to ritual, not routine. No laughter of children here, no bustle of markets, no clang of metal-shaping tools. Instead, one senses that the city was carved not for the pulse of life, but for the breath of reverence. Candles once flickered in alcoves, sending shadows across the stone walls like whispers written in flame. Their light did not guide work or ward off darkness, but was itself an offering, a fragile glow surrendered to the vastness of night. Some believe the entire cliff was chosen because it faced the setting sun, each chamber, each window, each narrow stairway aligned to catch that final descent of light, as though the builders sought not shelter from the world, but communion with the departing day. The stairways that lead nowhere, exploration deepens as we wander the suspended streets. Carved paths cling to the rock, narrow ribbons of stone that wind upward, leading to arches that open upon nothing but the sky. Staircases twist, ascend, and vanish into cliffs above, ending abruptly as though the dream itself was left unfinished. It is said these stairways were not errors of design, but intentions of devotion. They were pilgrim paths, meant not to carry the body to an upper chamber, but to remind the spirit of its own unfinished climb. Each step upward was less a movement of feet than of breath, a meditation in stone, a reminder that ascent never truly ends. At certain landings, altars remain, carved shallow into the wall. Upon them, offerings of oil and grain were once laid, left to the wind and the descending dusk. The altars faced west, always west, where the sun bled into the horizon, carrying color into silence. Those who stood there believed the sky was not closing, but opening, that with every sunset, the veil between earth and stars grew thin enough for prayers to rise. And so they carved their city high, closer to the breath of heaven, where stone itself could serve as a vessel of devotion. A city half in this world. The deeper one walks, the less this place feels like city at all. Its chambers are too bare, too spare for living. No hearths blacken the walls with smoke, no wells echo with water. Instead, the walls are lined with shallow carvings, spirals, sunbursts, constellations half remembered. Some chambers open into vast hollows, the ceilings pierced with star-shaped apertures, so that moonlight may fall like a celestial hand upon the floor. Others are small, so small one cannot stand, only kneel, as if the stone itself demanded humility. And there are chambers that feel like echoes of dreams, windows opening to nothing but air, ledges where torches once burned for no reason but to be seen by the setting Sunday. Here, memory outweighs practicality. Here, longing becomes the only true architecture. It is whispered that this city was not a home, but a vessel. a vessel not for the body, but for yearning. The people carved it not to live within, but to offer their devotion, to hold their prayers in stone, to etch their hope upon cliffs that would outlast them. Whispers of ancestral devotion. Whispers tell us that as twilight fell, processions would climb the winding paths, each carrying a flame cupped within hands. No words were spoken, for their voices belonged to the silence of descent. At the altars, they placed their offerings. At the chambers, they knelt. At the stairways that ended in the air, they paused, gazing westward as the sun dissolved into the horizon. They believed with a faith both gentle and unyielding that the light carried their prayers into the heavens. The prayers were not always requests. Many were simply names, remembered and spoken inwardly, sent upward with the fading glow. Others were breaths, long and slow, surrendered to the air as though breath itself were a kind of scripture. And when the last edge of the sun vanished, the city would glow faintly, as though twilight itself had not departed, but entered the cliff and made it luminous from within. Where memory fades today, the city lies in stillness. No processions climb its stairways, no candles flicker in its alcoves. The air carries no hymns, only the sound of wind brushing through hollow windows. And yet the place remains charged. To stand before it is to feel not absence, but resonance, as if the stones still hum faintly with devotion long poured into them. The altars are worn smooth, not from weather, but from countless hands. The spirals carved into the walls, though faded, still catch the moonlight and hold it like vessels. The stairways, though they lead nowhere, seem to invite the gaze upward still, reminding even the wanderer that ascent is never complete. And so the city endures, not as ruin, but as memory carved into stone. Memory not of empire or conquest, but of longing to touch what lies just beyond reach. The fade into silence night settles. The last breath of twilight slips into shadow, and the cliffside city glows faintly beneath the stars. Its hollows are no longer chambers, but constellations turned inward. Its stairways, no longer paths, but gestures of reaching. Its windows, no longer openings, but eyes gazing forever westward, where sun once dissolved into sky. It is said the city still dreams, that when the moon is full and the stars spill across the heavens, the hollow windows fill with light as though twilight itself has returned, carving the city once more. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was built only for the hour when day surrenders and night begins the breathless interval when the world itself seems to dream. And so you are left here, standing before the cliff, watching its chambers glow softly in starlight. No voices remain, no footsteps, only the silence of stone, breathing, listening. The city does not end. It waits. A place half within this world and half beyond it. A vessel for longing, forever suspended in twilight. The temple without walls. Amid forests where the roots twist like veins of shadow, there is said to have once risen a temple unlike any other. A place without walls, without roof, without ornament. Only pillars, pale and solemn, aligned in a perfect square, standing as if to frame the emptiness between them. At first glance, it would have seemed incomplete, a ruin left unfinished perhaps, or the skeleton of a sanctuary abandoned before its birth. But whispers tell us otherwise. This temple was whole, and its wholeness lay not in stone, but in the spaces between. It is said that this was a temple built for breath itself, not for sacrifice, nor for fire, nor for words, but for the simple, eternal rhythm of inhaling and exhaling, for the soft tide of life that moves through every being, unceasing, unseen, yet more sacred than any scripture. Beneath the canopy of the forest, the air was always shifting, carrying the cool dampness of earth, the sweetness of moss, the faint tang of rain waiting on the horizon. The worshippers came not to speak, but to breathe. They gathered at dawn, when the light was fragile and pale, slipping through leaves like spilled milk. And they gathered at dusk, when the horizon burned low and the forest held its breath with them, suspended in amber silence. There were no hymns, no chants, only the sound of lungs filling, emptying, filling again. A single body, made from many bodies, a communion not of words, but of breath. Some believe that in this place, the air itself was divine. Each inhalation was a drawing in of the sacred, each exhalation a gift back to the sky. Nothing else was needed. No altar, no relic, no scripture carved into stone. Only the pulse of silence carried on the rhythm of breathing. Legends say the forest grew around it deliberately, as if nature itself had chosen to guard this fragile space. The trees bowed inward, their roots weaving a hidden wall beneath the soil, their branches forming a ceiling that shifted with the seasons. No human hand could have built such a sanctuary, and yet, the pillars pale as moonlight remain, carved by those who knew that to hold breath within stone would be to trap it, to suffocate it, so they gave it no walls, only frames, only the suggestion of a temple. It is whispered that the people who came here did not pray in the way we think of prayer. They did not ask, they did not confess, they did not even praise, they simply breathed together, and in doing so, became aware of the great invisible thread that ties all life to all other life. They became, for a moment, less themselves and more the forest, the air, the unseen sky. Perhaps that is why the temple was never abandoned. It did not fall into ruin, like other sanctuaries of stone and pride. It simply dissolved into the very element it was built for. Like breath dissolves into wind, like smoke fades into air. The pillars remain, but the rest belongs now to silence, to memory, to the trees. And yet, those who wander through the forest today sometimes say they feel it still, the temple that is not there. They pause without knowing why. They notice their own breathing. They sense, for a fleeting moment, that they are standing in the center of something larger than themselves. Some say the air is heavier there, as though filled with old breath that has never left. Others say it is lighter, as though the forest itself exhales in rhythm with them. It is said that at dusk, if you stand within the four pillars, you may feel a stillness that is not entirely your own. The kind of stillness that seems to listen back. And if you close your eyes, you may hear it, not a voice, not a sound, but the oceanic hush of countless breaths, layered one upon another, like waves that never break. Whispers tell us that this temple was a lesson, not a monument, that its true form could never be captured in stone. For how could one build walls around something as fleeting as air? How could one lock away the sacred, when the sacred is what moves freely between us, unseen, unmeasured, unclaimed? Some stories say that those who once kept this temple had no names for gods, no faces for worship. Their only certainty was the breath itself, the tide of life that enters at birth, that leaves at death, that links the first cry of the infant to the last sigh of the elder. To them, this was the only prayer worth knowing, and perhaps it still is, for when the forest grows quiet, and the night draws its veil across the sky, the temple seems to awaken again, not in stone, not in wood, but in the listener, in the one who pauses, who inhales, who exhales. The temple exists wherever we remember it, wherever we return to that sacred stillness that requires nothing but breath. By the close of night, as the stars settle into their silent watch above the canopy, the pillars glow faintly with the silver of moonlight. And though they stand alone, surrounded by shadows, they seem less like ruins and more like reminders, a vessel for a teaching too simple, too fragile, to ever die. It is said the temple is always there, even when unseen, not bound to place but to presence, not etched in stone but in silence. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was only ever meant to be remembered with every inhale, with every exhale, with every breath we share with the world around us. And so, the temple remains, always present, never held, dissolved into the wind, suspended in the eternal communion of silence and air, the valley of the vanished river. There is a valley, quiet and vast, where once a river ran. Now, it lies empty, nothing more than a silver scar etched deep into the earth, a line that glimmers beneath the touch of moonlight. By day, it appears only as a bed of stones, pale and brittle, crumbled from long-forgotten currents. But by night, under the gaze of the stars, the valley seems to remember itself. The moonlight rests upon those stones as though upon water, and the silence of the air feels heavy, like the pause between two breaths. It is said that the river did not die, nor dry, nor fade away. Some believe it simply stepped into the night and never returned. Long ago, this river was not merely water. It was not seen as a passage for fish, nor a resource for fields. nor a burden for bridges. No, it was worshipped, believed to be a living god. Its currents were said to flow between worlds, from the realm of the living to the realm of the unseen, and further still into the mysteries that even myth could not name. The people of the valley spoke to it as one speaks to a guardian, a keeper, a messenger, and so they gave it offerings. Coins of bronze, small and crude, carried the glimmer of a hope cast into its depths. Carved talismans of bone, etched with spirals that mimicked the curl of water, were dropped with trembling hands. Fragments of vows, threads from a wedding garment, or scraps of parchment where words of longing had been inked, were surrendered to its surface. Each gift was not an end, but a beginning. For once cast into the water, the river bore it away, not lost but delivered. Delivered to the other side, delivered to gods, to ancestors, to the unknown. It is said that when the river swelled in spring, rushing and foaming with the melt of distant snows, it sang with voices not its own. That in its roar, one could hear the laughter of those long gone, or the whisper of promises not yet fulfilled. To stand on its banks was to stand in a doorway between now and forever. But then, without warning, it ceased. The river withdrew, leaving behind only silence and stone. Some believe it was punishment that the offerings were not enough, or not pure, or not given in reverence. Others believe it was mercy, that the river had grown tired of carrying so much grief, so many secrets, so many unspoken words, and chose at last to rest. And yet, the valley still remembers. When the wind slips across its hollow bed, there are those who swear the river sings again, not with water, but with ghostly current. A music of air passing over stone, a hush that curls in the ear like a memory half forgotten. Stand there long enough, and you may hear it too. The phantom rushing, the imagined laughter, the voice of the river speaking once more through absence. It is said that on nights marked by the moon, when the stars scatter like coins across the sky, the valley becomes alive again. The stones shimmer faintly as though damp, the air grows cool as though carrying mist, and travelers feel a weight in their chest, as if the river has returned not to be seen, but to be breathed. Perhaps it never truly vanished. Perhaps it slipped beneath, flowing in hidden veins deep under the earth, waiting for the ones who still remember its name. Perhaps it entered the dream of the world, a current of silence moving beneath our sleep. Some ancient scrolls faded now, their ink a blur of dust and time tell us of rivers that were said to vanish deliberately. Sacred streams that descended into caverns, not to disappear, but to journey into other realms, carrying with them the last breath of those who came to kneel upon their banks. These texts speak of waters that re-emerged miles, even centuries away, rising again as springs marked by legend. Could this valley be one such place? Could its river still flow, unseen, carrying secrets too old to name? Whispers tell us that there was once a ritual, performed by the elders of the valley. They would kneel in silence, each holding a bowl of clear water drawn from the river. At the sound of a single bell, they would tip the bowls into the stream, returning the water to itself. A cycle, unbroken. A vow, renewed. And when the river left, the ritual left with it, but the bell, they say, still echoes faintly when the valley is hushed enough to listen. It is difficult, in such a place, not to feel one's own breath become the offering. Inhale, exhale, as though lungs were rivers themselves, carrying currents through the body, tides that remind us of what is fleeting, what is eternal. Some who wander here kneel without knowing why. They press their palms to the stone bed, cool beneath their fingers, and close their eyes. They imagine the river flowing still, carrying with it everything they cannot speak, everything too heavy to bear. And in that act, something shifts. A quiet release, a soft surrender, as if the river, though unseen, still listens. Beneath the silence, the valley feels less like absence and more like presence veiled. The air hums faintly, like breath beneath words, and the stones themselves, they glimmer as though marked by memory, as though remembering what it is to shine with water. The people who once lived here are gone, but their offerings remain. Buried deep in the bed, coins tarnished, talismans crumbled, fragments of vows worn into dust. Yet, the meaning lingers, carried not by water, but by silence. A silence thick with echoes, waiting for ears willing to hear. And so the valley holds us, not with answers, not with certainty, but with a question too ancient to resolve. Where do rivers go when they vanish? Do they dry, or do they dream? Do they cease, or do they continue in ways unseen? Perhaps this river has not left us at all. Perhaps it has only changed its form. Perhaps the wind that brushes the skin carries its voice. The rain that falls carries its memory. The tears we shed carry its current. Perhaps every river is one river, and none of them ever truly disappear. As night deepens, the valley becomes darker, quieter, more infinite. The moon tilts low, its reflection scattered across the pale stones, as though the bed itself were water once more. For a fleeting moment, the valley seems whole, alive, eternal, the river restored, though not in sight, only in spirit. And then the vision fades, the stones remain dry, the silence remains heavy, and yet, the listener is left with the sense that something has passed between worlds, a current unseen, a breath unspoken, a God unforgotten. Perhaps the river has withdrawn into hidden realms, waiting not for sight, but for remembrance, waiting for the moment we pause, breathe, and remember its name. And so the story closes not with certainty, but with silence, the silence of a river that is not gone, but veiled, always present, never held. A silver scar by day, a ghostly current by night. It is said the river still sings. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The plateau of the spiral altar. Upon a high plateau, where the horizon stretches like an endless veil, there remains an altar carved with spirals. The land rises in silence, vast and open, as though the earth itself wished to lift its face to the sky. No trees, no rivers, no shelter, only stone and wind, and the great sweep of heavens above. It is here, at the edge of solitude, that the altar endures. At first light, dawn falls upon it. The stone shifts from shadow into gold, from grey into amber, from cold into glow. For a brief moment, it seems less like stone and more like flame, as though the altar itself burns with a fire not of this world. The spirals etched across its surface catch the sun in their grooves, soft ridges filled with light, and the plateau shimmers as if the sky has descended to rest upon the earth. It is said the altar was no mere place of sacrifice. It was not a throne for gods, nor a stage for voices. It was a compass of silence, a mirror to the stars, a measure not of time as we know it, but of time as it breathes, vast, celestial, and eternal. Whispers tell us that long ago, people would climb the plateau with offerings, not coins, not weapons, not wealth. Instead, they brought objects of devotion, a shell carried from the ocean's edge, though no sea lay near, a feather marked by the moonlight of a night hunt, a stone polished smooth by the river's forgotten hand. These they placed upon the altar, carefully, at moments chosen not by the clock of the sun, but by the turning of stars, for the altar was a line. Each groove in its spiral, each angle of its edge, held a meaning that only the patient could know. When the first star of twilight appeared, there was a place for that. When the moon reached its height, another place. When dawn returned, washing the sky pale and blue, there was yet another. The altar, some believe, was not about worship, but about listening to the rhythm of the cosmos, listening to the breath of the infinite. It is said that those who gathered did not chant, did not call, did not plead. They stood in stillness, breath mingling with the wind, eyes lifted to the dome of stars. Their silence was itself an offering. Their patience, their attention, their surrender to the rhythm of sky and shadow, these were their prayers. And in return, they believed the heavens listened. Some carved scrolls, though fragile and nearly lost to time, suggest that this altar marked eclipses, comets, and seasons of change. But the people of the plateau did not think of these as events to be observed, recorded, or predicted. To them, each shadow of the moon, each falling star, each tilt of sun across stone was a message, a whisper of order beneath chaos, a voice not in words, but in rhythm. Imagine standing there, the air thin, the world far below, silence vast as an ocean. The altar before you gleams with dawn, each spiral glowing like a pathway into forever. Around you, shadows stretch long and slow, drawn by the hand of the rising Sunday. You feel small, yet infinite, grounded, yet lifted, alone, yet part of something greater than yourself. The spirals themselves hold mystery. Some curve outward, like breath expanding. Others curl inward, like a secret folding upon itself. To trace them with a fingertip is to feel the echo of time, beginnings and endings woven into a single line. Some believe the spirals were meant to mirror the sky's own geometry, the slow turning of constellations, the cycle of moon to moon, the eternal dance of light into shadow. Others believe they were more than mirrors, that they were invitations, doorways, paths carved in stone for the spirit to follow when words could no longer carry meaning. Whispers tell us that on nights of great silence, when no wind stirred and the stars burned sharp and close, the altar seemed alive. A heartbeat could be felt in the stone, faint but steady, as though the plateau itself inhaled and exhaled. Some say it was the earth listening to the sky, or the sky listening to the earth. Others say it was the rhythm of the human soul, magnified, reflected, made eternal by contact with the altar. Generations passed. The hands that carved the spirals grew to dust. The eyes that watched the heavens closed. The offerings dissolved into soil. And yet the altar remained, waiting, as though its true purpose had never been fulfilled. Travelers who find it now often speak of the silence that surrounds it, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of attention, the silence of a breath held just before revelation. The plateau offers no answers, no voice, no vision. And yet, to stand before the altar is to feel spoken to, not in words, but in presence, not in sound, but in rhythm. It is said the altar does not measure time as we know it. To the altar, an age is no different than a moment. A star falling is no different than a breath taken. All things spiral, all things return, all things dissolve and begin again. Perhaps this is why the people of the plateau never feared endings. To them, endings were only spirals, folding into beginnings unseen. Some scholars, gazing at its shape, say it was an early observatory, a tool of astronomy before the word existed. But those who come at night, who linger in its presence, feel something deeper. They feel that the altar was not built to look outward, but inward, that it was not meant to chart the stars, but to let the stars chart us. Beneath the silence of dawn, the altar glows once more. The spirals shimmer faintly with the first light, as if the stone itself remembers the countless eyes that once gazed upon it, the countless breaths once released into its stillness. You can almost see them, shadows of figures, kneeling, standing, breathing, waiting, an assembly of silence, lost to time, but not to memory. And then the sun rises higher. The glow fades. The plateau grows ordinary again, just stone, just wind, just emptiness. The altar stands alone, spirals dulled by daylight, waiting for hands that will never return, eyes that once searched the heavens with devotion. Perhaps it was never meant to be used once, or even once a lifetime. Perhaps it was carved to wait, to endure, to hold stillness until the world itself was ready to listen again. The plateau remains. The altar endures. The spirals lie quiet, veiled in dust, but beneath it all, something lingers. A rhythm too vast to be lost, a silence too sacred to be broken. Perhaps the altar is not finished. Perhaps it waits for you. And so the story closes as dawn fully breaks. The light floods the plateau, blinding, golden, infinite. The altar stands silent, eternal, as though breathing still. The wind carries nothing but its hush. And the listener is left to wonder, is it only stone, or is it memory? Is it only silence, or is it presence? Is it only past, or is it forever? Whispers tell us the altar still waits. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The tomb without a name far below the living earth, where roots twist into darkness and the weight of centuries presses down, there is said to be a door. A door not made of wood, nor iron, but of stone, two vast slabs carved as though the mountain itself had folded in upon its own silence. Upon this stone, spirals have been etched, lines that curl inward, as if guiding the gaze into a place beyond sight. It is here the story begins, before the threshold of a tomb said to belong to no one, and to everyone. The air, even at the entrance, feels older than breath itself. It hangs heavy, with the weight of dust and memory, as though each particle has been waiting for the moment a stranger might inhale it. A faint shimmer lingers along the ground crystal dust, catching the dim flicker of torchlight, like stars fallen and scattered at one's feet. To enter is not simply to step forward, it is to move sideways in time, into a chamber where the living and the lost share the same hush. It is said this tomb was not built to house the dead. Whispers tell us it was carved as a vessel, a place where time was set aside, where those who entered did so not to sleep in death, but to wait in eternity. The walls speak in symbols, lines, spirals, constellations traced into stone. Each mark carries the suggestion of meaning, though the meaning itself slips away, just beyond reach, like water through cupped hands. Some believe that within these walls, processions once came by candlelight. Imagine the glow, the slow flicker against carved faces, shadows leaning across spirals, silence alive with the low hum of voices. Not mourning, not grief, but chants that spoke of crossing, of stepping from one realm into another. Their rhythm would echo, circling within the chamber, spiraling upward until it touched the unseen ceiling, vanishing into stillness. The tomb, then, was not a grave, it was a threshold, a cradle carved of stone, where the body remained, but the spirit followed the path of the symbols, rising, spiraling, dissolving into the starlight. Imagine walking deeper. The torchlight dims, yet the air glows faintly. Walls painted once in ochre and blue, now faded to ghost colors, traces of celestial maps that no longer align with the sky above. Coins lie scattered across the floor, some melted together, some bent and brittle with age. Not payment for passage, but perhaps reminders, tokens of those who believed that what entered this place did not vanish, but continued elsewhere. Fragments of talismans rest in the dust. A carved bird, wings outstretched as if mid-flight. A shard of polished obsidian, black as night, reflecting the faintest echo of light. A spiral drawn again and again, scratched into stone until the hand that carved it could do no more. Offerings not of wealth, but of memory, of hope. It is said that when the final procession left, the great doors of stone were closed, not with chains, but with silence. No marker, no name carved above. For the tomb was meant for all, and for none. A vessel beyond ownership, a cradle for the eternal. In such stillness, time moves differently. One could imagine that those who entered still linger, seated in circles of stone, candles still in hand, waiting for some celestial signal. Perhaps they believed that the tomb itself would open, not outward, but upward, lifting those within toward the spiral of stars traced upon its walls. Perhaps they wait still, their voices long faded, their silence heavier than the mountain above them. Whispers tell us that if one stands quietly, deep within the chamber, the air carries more than silence. Some claim they hear a breath, not their own, but something slower, older, as though the tomb itself were alive, dreaming beneath the earth. Others swear the dust glimmers faintly, not only when touched by torch or lantern, but of its own accord, pale sparks rising and fading, like the echo of a constellation long gone. It is tempting to wonder whether the tomb guards a secret not of death, but of return. Whether those who stepped within it did not end, but folded themselves into waiting, as though the earth were only a veil, and the stone only a pause. Perhaps it was never meant to be opened. Perhaps those who carved it into the living rock knew that the truest doors are not the ones we step through, but the ones we feel, invisible, when silence becomes too deep to bear. The altar of spirals, the offerings, the chants all point not toward finality, but toward continuance, toward the rhythm of something that cannot be undone. The tomb rests. It does not move, it does not speak, yet it hums with stillness, like a held breath. It is less a grave than a womb, less a prison than a vessel. Its walls cradle memory. Its dust shimmers like the skin of forgotten stars. Its silence folds itself again and again, deeper and deeper, until it becomes a presence in itself. And so, the story leaves us here, before the carved doors of stone, before the spirals etched into shadow, before the hush that seems both empty and eternal. No one claims the tomb, no one names it. It waits, beneath the earth, beneath memory, beneath the silence. Perhaps it waits for us, perhaps it waits for nothing at all, but some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And some doors open not with keys, but with dreams. The kingdom of silent symbols high in forgotten mountains, where the air thins until each breath feels like a prayer. There lie ruins that speak without words. They rise from the stone like fragments of memory, half buried, half vanished, their surfaces marked not by letters, but by patterns, spirals, dots, shifting forms that seem to move when caught in the silver hand of the moon. It is said these are the remnants of a people who carved no script, who trusted no alphabet, but who instead shaped their truth in silence. Their kingdom, if kingdom it was, wrote with breath and light. And even now, when the mountain wind glides across the crumbled walls, it seems to carry not a voice, but a presence, a hush that remembers what words cannot hold. The first sight of these ruins is arresting. Stone blocks lie tumbled in places, yet on certain walls the carvings remain sharp, glowing faintly beneath the moon as though they had absorbed centuries of starlight. Spirals intertwine with dots, creating rhythms that echo constellations above. Some believe the stones themselves were maps not of territory, but of breath, of the invisible movements that connect body to spirit, sky to earth. Whispers tell us that in this kingdom, language was never spoken. Instead, it was carried in the shadow of a hand, the tilt of a head, the pause between gestures. Priests did not write their hymns upon scrolls, but arranged torches in vast circles, letting flame itself compose the words. Families did not tell their children of ancestry through long tales, but through touch a hand pressed upon the heart, a silence held long enough to become memory. It is said their rulers did not decree with speeches, nor inscribe their commands upon tablets. Instead, they turned to the sky. Through the slow drifting of stars, through the arc of the moon, they revealed what was to be done. When the constellation, known as the spiral, crossed the horizon, seeds were planted. When the stars bent toward the north, harvest was gathered. To speak was unnecessary. The cosmos itself breathed their language, and the people listened. Imagine such a world. A gathering at dusk, torches flickering in patterns across a valley, each flame placed with care, forming symbols that glowed like constellations on the earth. The people stood together in silence, their shadows stretching across stone. Each gesture, whether a raised hand or the lowering of the eyes, carried meaning as deep as any story. And above, the sky mirrored them, star for torch, constellation for symbol, as though heaven itself was engaged in dialogue with those below. It is said that in times of mourning, the people did not weep aloud. Instead, they created spirals of stones upon the earth, walking slowly in silence, each step leaving a trace of grief. When joy came, it was not shouted or sung, but marked by circles of light, fires lit across mountain ridges, their glow visible from valleys far away. Their emotions were not spoken, but shaped offered to the night as patterns that faded and dissolved, yet remained alive in memory. Some scholars, centuries later, have called this a loss. They say that to have no words is to vanish, to leave behind only fragments without explanation. Yet others wonder if this people had touched upon something more profound. For words can trap meaning, fix it, confine it to a single shape. But silence allows meaning to expand, to ripple outward, like a breath dissolving into the wind. Perhaps their true scripture was not carved into stone at all, but written upon the spaces between, upon the shadows, upon the stars. Even today, under a clear night sky, one might look upward and wonder, were there sentences, constellations, were there poems, the trails of comets? Did their histories unfold in silence, retold not through sound, but through the movement of light across darkness? Whispers tell us of a final ritual performed when the kingdom's end drew near. The people, sensing the fading of their time, gathered upon the highest plateau. There, instead of recording their fall in words, they formed an immense spiral of torches stretching across the mountain slope. From a distance, it appeared as though the earth itself had caught fire in the pattern of a galaxy. They stood in silence until the last torch burned low, until night reclaimed the fire. Then they vanished, leaving only the symbols on the stone and the faint glow that still clings to them when the moonlight returns. Some say the silence they left behind was not an absence, but a presence. It lingers, like breath held too long, waiting to be exhaled. If you stand before those ruins at dawn or under the stars, you may feel it, the hush, pressing gently at your chest, the weight of an untold story hovering at the edge of awareness. And so we are left here, before the walls that glow faintly in moonlight, etched with spirals and dots that seem to shift with every glance. We cannot translate them, we cannot hold them within the cage of words, but perhaps that is the point. Perhaps silence itself was their scripture. Perhaps their wisdom was not meant to be written nor spoken, but only felt, like breath on the skin, like the soft pulse of light upon stone. And perhaps it still lingers, carried not upon the walls but upon the sky itself. Look upward, see how the stars are scattered, how they form their own spirals, their own shifting patterns. Perhaps what they wrote is still being written, not on parchment, not on stone, but across the heavens. Perhaps their language has never ended. And in this silence, where memory fades and the sky glows with its endless script, we are left to wonder, to listen, to breathe, for some voices do not speak, they echo only when we are ready to hear. The throne beneath the stars. At the heart of ruins long swallowed by grass, there stands a single throne. It rises quietly from the earth, carved from stone, worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind. Its back leans ever so slightly toward the stars, as though it had tilted in reverence to the heavens above. Around it, nothing remains of halls or chambers. No walls, no towers, no crown. Only the throne itself, solitary, enduring, and the long silence that curls around it like mist. It is said the throne did not belong to one king, nor even to one dynasty, but to a lineage that understood rulership differently. For them, power was not ownership. It was not land to be measured, nor riches to be counted. It was guardianship. The throne was not a seat of authority over men, but a seat of devotion beneath the stars. Even now, when the moonlight spills across its worn surface, the throne seems less like stone and more like a listening ear, waiting, watching, remembering. And the grass that sways around it bends like worshippers in eternal vigil, bowing in the hush of wind. Whispers tell us of the rituals once performed here. When twilight deepened and the first stars broke through the veil of dusk, torches were lit in a circle around the throne. Men and women gathered in silence, their shadows weaving with the flames. No herald proclaimed their arrival, no music stirred the air, only the soft rhythm of footsteps, and then stillness. Offerings were placed at the base of the throne, fragments of stone polished smooth, vessels filled with water, sometimes nothing more than a hand laid gently upon the earth. It is said these offerings were not meant for the king, nor for any ruler of flesh and bone. They were given to eternity itself, to the unseen, to the quiet forces that carried breath into wind, light into darkness, time into memory. In these rituals, vows were whispered, vows not of conquest, but of care. One vow promised the tending of fields, so that the people would eat. Another vowed the watching of rivers, so that water would flow. Another pledged the guarding of night skies, so that stars could remain unbroken by forgetfulness. Each vow rose like smoke into the heavens, absorbed by silence. The throne itself became a character in these ceremonies, empty yet full, silent yet brimming with unseen presence. It was said that when the people bowed before it, they were not bowing to stone, but to the covenant it embodied, the sacred bond between earth and sky. Legends recall that those who sat upon the throne never sat long. It was not a place of comfort, nor of permanence. Rulers came not to rest, but to listen. They lowered themselves upon the cool stone and tilted their heads back to the stars. There, in stillness, they waited. Some claimed they could hear faint harmonies carried by the night air tones that rose and fell with the constellations. Others said the throne hummed softly beneath them, as though echoing with the voices of all who had sat before. It is whispered that one ruler, whose name has been lost to dust, sat so long in meditation that when he rose, his hair was white, and his voice spoke no more of earthly matters, but only of starlight and silence. Some believe he did not die in the end, but dissolved, becoming part of the breath of the night. And so the throne endured, even as the kingdom around it faded. Walls crumbled, streets dissolved into grass, temples collapsed into earth. But the throne remained. Perhaps it was never truly part of the kingdom. Perhaps it was older than stone, older than time, set there not by human hands but by something greater, waiting for guardians to come and tend it, to keep vigil for a season before returning to dust. Now, Only the echoes of wind circle it. The grass bends and shivers like the voices of long-departed worshippers. The stars above seem to lean closer, their light brushing against the throne's surface as though still in dialogue with it. And when the air is still, one might feel a presence, an unseen weight resting upon the seat, as if some invisible figure continues the vigil. If you were to approach it now, barefoot in the hush of night, you would find the stone cool beneath your hand. You might notice faint grooves worn into the base, where countless offerings had once been laid. You might hear, not with your ears, but with the silence within you, the echo of whispered vows that never fully vanished. For silence, once spoken, does not die. It lingers, marked upon the air, pressed into the dust, waiting for those who still know how to listen. Perhaps the throne has never been empty. Perhaps every vow uttered at its base still sits there, unseen, layering upon itself until the air above it hums with quiet devotion. Perhaps what leans back toward the stars is not stone at all, but memory solidified, longing turned into form, and so the image lingers. A single throne, no kingdom, no crown, only the earth, the wind, the stars. It is not abandonment we see, but expectation, not ruin, but vigil. The throne still waits beneath the stars, beneath the silence, beneath the endless turning of the sky. It waits, not for a ruler to claim it, but for guardians who remember that to rule is not to own, but to listen, not to command, but to keep watch, not to conquer, but to vow. And so we leave it here, this stone throne leaning back into the eternal heavens, empty, full, silent, alive. Perhaps it was never meant to be sat upon again. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Or perhaps, in nights when the stars are clear and the air still carries whispers, it calls quietly to those who can hear, not with words, but with silence. The silence of vows still lingering, the silence of guardianship not yet broken. And as we drift into sleep, we too lean back toward the stars, listening,